Alrighty, welcome to Romero Records Virtual Cast. Today we have on Justin J. Pearson. How's it going, man?
It is going pretty good. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So you are dealing with some stuff. I believe this is basically just a pipeline issue in the Memphis area. I think it was Byhalia, correct? And was that
That's right.
specifically? Um, so if you could just elaborate, what was going on with that whole situation and how it's affecting the people in the area.
Yeah, thank you so much again for this opportunity. The Byhalia Connection Pipeline was a pipeline funded by Valero Energy Corporation and Plains All American to build a pipeline through Southwest Memphis to connect to Mississippi and then to send that oil and export it to the Gulf. Now, while they were planning to do that, they were also planning to build it atop the Memphis Sand Aquifer, which is where we get our drinking water, through areas that we know have breaches in the clay layer, so they are more susceptible to contamination. In addition, they were going to take Black folks' land through a process called eminent domain had they not fought back in court against this process. And to top it all off, our community sits atop the most seismically active area outside of California. And so they were really planning a pretty dangerous project for our water and for our people that would have had far reaching implications and ramifications for us. Now, we were fortunate that that project was canceled in July of last year. But as you know, these corporations and entities, they don't stop even after they face a loss. They spend lots of money and energy and resources to try and find ways around communities. And we're even actively facing that situation now with legislation that's being proposed at the State House to strip local communities of having a voice. We beat them before we had any local laws. Then we took that momentum of the victory and created some local laws because through the fight, we realized there were some regulatory gaps. And now the pipeline company has responded to try a test bill to see if we will give up some of our democracy for pipeline companies in Tennessee. And I believe if that's effective, they'll try and do that in some other places.
Now, it seems like a case of one of the things where something happens and they actually are trying to push the agenda, but it's almost as if they're just trying everything to see what they can get away with so that in the future, they know what is possible.
Exactly. That is perfectly said. They are testing out as much as they can to see what they can do in some other places, to see how they can exploit some other communities. That's in effect what they did, in the fight against Standing Rock. That's what they did in the fight against DAPL, what they learned in Keystone. And they have a playbook that they share amongst other companies and fossil fuel industries on how to exploit and hurt communities. We, as people who seek justice, have to have our own playbook as well, right? One that's antithetical to theirs, that says, here's how you fight for justice. And we have to remain nimble and we have to remain focused on the people who are going to be most excluded as we continue to push for them to change. And as I say this often, the Byhalia Connection pipeline of the fight against Plains and Valero and now the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and those types of folks, it is not the only incident that we see of environmental injustice or environmental racism, right? It didn't create that, it revealed it in a substantial way to our community and to, I would argue, parts of the country that may not have realized it before.
Yeah, it's pretty odd that people would even want to pursue something like that just because I mean, I get it, you want to accomplish certain things and money-wise as well,
Mhm.
but it just seems odd that you know what's going to happen. You know people are going to fight back against it. So why wouldn't you already offer an alternative? You know what I mean? Like already have something where it doesn't affect the communities or have them in a situation to where they're having to fight back against getting their land taken or something like that. So, I mean, do you feel like there's just no regard for for the neighborhoods?
Right. There isn't regard for the neighborhoods, right? Oil company executives' main priority is the motives to their shareholders. Now, they've co opted some elected leaders to pretend as though they are executives in these firms and they are acting out of the interest of pipeline companies, not the interest of people. And that is real. And that is what we're seeing happening right now with Kevin Vaughn, Representative Kevin Vaughn, and Senator Yeager out of the state legislature. And to your point, they do know there's going to be resistance in communities that they go, but they do something really that has been really effective. They typically hire a person of color or person from the community to sell the idea. And in Memphis, they hired a former county commissioner, a former president of the National Association for the Advancement of Color People, NAACP in Memphis, to be their spokesperson.
Mm.
Then they hired an attorney who was well-respected African-American attorney in Memphis to be their lawyer. And they gave away over $1 million in philanthropy to buy support for their project.
Wow.
But what happened when they stopped glossing over things and they were asked, why did you choose Boxtown and Westwood as the communities that you're going to build this pipeline? One of the land agents told the truth. He said, we're going to build it here because this is the path of least resistance.
That's crazy.
Right? That's what they really think. And it isn't that people aren't against the project, because people are against these projects. Folks don't want to see these in their communities. But what's happening is they are looking at areas that have been most politically disempowered and dispossessed, most economically disempowered and dispossessed, most civically disempowered and disinvested. And those are the places that they're saying we can go through here because no one's going to care. And what happened in our movement, and what happens if we're really going to be effective in creating a movement for justice across this country, people who don't seem to be directly affected are going to have to pay attention to what's happening, because that has ramifications for the rest of the community. If a pipeline spills in South Memphis, it's going to poison the water in Midtown, it's going to poison the water in the periphery communities as well. And so we have to be caring about what's happening to other parts. Just like if there's a kid that's going to bed hungry in one part of the community, that has overall implications for the educational attainment and achievement for the entire community, right? We have to see how the individual and the collective are interconnected. And if we can continue to build in that way, in neighborhoods, in cities, in counties, across regions, across the state, we'll have way more power, people power, as I often call it, way more people power than crude oil pipeline companies and their colleagues.
Something that I've always thought about when it comes to political issues or anything of that nature, big changes in an area, is you should be kind of required to live close, if not in that area, because if something goes wrong, you can't just be, you can't be a governor of Tennessee and living in California and then being like, oh, that sucks for y'all. I live in Cali. So, is there any kind of legislature like that when it comes to like making, that's literally groundbreaking for the pipeline type stuff? Like, is there anything that says they have to, have representatives who are living in those affected areas or anything?
Not that I know of. And in our state in particular, there's some resistance against residency laws, which is a conversation for another day. But in Memphis in particular, a lot of folks have advocated that people like police officers or firefighters who make their living in our city and in our county need to live and be proximate. These oil executives are not proximate. In fact, and when we look at where the pipeline projects go, it's typically lower wealth communities, typically communities of people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color. And if you look at the board of Plains All American, one of the companies that was leading this project, it's not a single person of color or Black person on the board, right? I think there may be one, in fact, but there are no Black African-American descendants of enslaved people on the board. Yet lots of their projects are going through those types of communities. The lack of proximity is part of the problem in a lot of legislative decision-making, because we have people who are not proximate to the communities that are to the parts of the community that are suffering the most. You don't hear a lot of folks talking about representing poor folks. You don't hear a lot of people talking about representing those who have too few wages to be able to provide for their families on the local level in the way that we should. Because if you admit to that, you're going to have to commit to doing something about it. You don't hear those commitments because people aren't admitting to the systemic problems that are killing our communities. When it comes to pollution, and so Memphis Community Against Pollution, which I happen to be the fortunate president of, pollution is killing us. It is actually taking years off the lives of poor people and Black and brown folks in this country. The cancer risk in Southwest Memphis and one part of the community is 4 times the national average. The cancer risk in another part of Memphis is over 2 times the national average. We're talking about years of people's lives being taken away only because of where they live. And so less than your DNA, right? It's your zip code that's making a difference in your life expectancy and your life outcomes. And that continues to get extrapolated to the types of schools that you're able to go to, right? The types of job opportunities that you're able to access. And we have gotten and reached a point, quite devastatingly so, that some people's lives are expendable and other people's aren't. Some people deserve to have access to healthcare, and some people don't. And some folks, you get access to healthcare, but your copay is so high you can't afford the medicine, right? And we can't separate who are those people that are suffering that way. Where do they live, and what type of jobs do they have? So you have the lowest wage workers living in the poorest communities with the least access to the healthcare that they need because of the environment that's killing them. If that is not systemic inequality, injustice, racism, and a system designed to harm and to kill folks, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I was talking to Zoe Duran, become a good friend of mine. She was talking about how just how not just poor the neighborhoods are, but the quality of life in certain neighborhoods. You don't even have the access to get to stuff. And I was also talking to I think it's Lindsay Pender. She works with The Works, and she was talking about how it's like, gosh, I can't remember how far she said. Maybe like 3 miles was like the nearest grocery store.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, if you did not have a car or a bike, like there's zero access to these type of neighborhoods. And it's literally impossible to get good nutrition if you don't have the right stores in the neighborhoods that are selling these foods that can literally give people nourishment to perform to their best. I mean, if you take kids, and which that's a whole another subject with school lunches, but it's crazy that we expect people to perform well when they don't have the fuel it takes to perform well.
Right.
And you expect them to have great jobs and do well with no opportunity to even do it.
Yep. It's cruel. It's cruel.
Yeah.
Because the expectations of our society, even if parents, doesn't change. You still expect a child who spends 20 days or 30 days out of the school year in the hospital due to asthma-related illnesses to succeed, as well as a kid who had none of those problems and or had the appropriate medication. And so they were able to do all the events and the sports and the never missed a day of school, right? Able to live an entirely different life. And yet our society says this is a meritocracy, that if you just work hard, right, you're going to make it.
Yeah.
Without ever paying attention to the societal factors that contribute to a person's life, which is really convenient, right? If you do well, that like, it was you worked hard, you were so smart, you did, right? That's extraordinarily convenient for certain people. But it's devastating for other folk who put the same weights on themselves. The reason I didn't make it was because of this, or the reason I'm not as successful is because of me, and not having an opportunity to be able to look a little more broadly and see, well, it was designed for this to happen, right? We got the stats on it that, if you are a black child with asthma, black children with asthma die 10 times more than white children with asthma. We got the statistics that black women giving birth die 3 times more likely than white women, right? Like we have the information, but the question is, how do we get this type of information to more people, right? Is part of it. So informing people and educating people about what's happening. But then how does that influence our advocacy to change it? And there are a lot of people who are really good with the status quo because they're winning. And there are a lot of people who don't realize that the status quo has been historically and socially designed to be and to produce these inequitable outcomes. And a few of us break through, very few, but that is not the norm, because I think it's only a handful of white folks have as much wealth as every black person in the entire country, including millionaires. Like, that's not accidental, right? Those are the systems. And I'll say this last thing, and just to affirm this point, I was teaching a class on equity and equality, and was teaching people about redlining. There's great work happening across the city of Memphis on redlining and things. But one of the students said, I just thought white people had more because they were better than us. Now, this young lady, she was 23 years old, raising a child.
That's sad.
And it just happened, right? In the 21st century. It just happened it was 2021, where she realized from our lecture that it wasn't just because they were better, that they had better schools. It wasn't just because they were better that they had cleaner neighborhoods, right? But we have to subvert that status quo over and over and over again by our determination and sure will to not give in to this system.
Yeah, and to drive home that point, it's all about education, like the access to education and the ability for people to change a system. Like the school systems nowadays always say they're meant for, like, in the movies where you have that one teacher who is instructing a schoolhouse of kids. Like, that's literally still how our system is set up. It's not set up to be like, oh, you want to be an engineer? Yeah, go do this. I mean, it's set up for that if you're in like some really wealthy neighborhood or something.
That's right.
But you're not going to see these types of systems in, like in Frasier or something like that. It's not even a possibility. We need to make these things more even just plausible than it is. It's like, oh no, you don't have a chance unless you go to this neighborhood or something like that. Like, we need to be able to make it to where we have very few, if not no situations, hopefully no situations, like that young girl who didn't even know, you know what I mean? Like, you should at least know and at least be able to have some sort of voice in the change. Like, she didn't even know it was a thing. Imagine if that was something she was supposed to vote on, and she like goes down and it says something like that. Uneducated voters are a problem.
Yeah, and it's a couple of things. I'll say that it's one, who is in control of the education, right? We have in the state legislature people saying we're not going to teach critical race theory. We weren't anyway before, but just saying things like that. And so it's like, who's responsible for that education of children? And then how do we create that more liberated, transformative type of education through communities? Because I think that's something that we should spend a couple minutes on. But when we look at who is currently in charge of the curriculum, who's writing the books? What type of schools did they go to? What information did they have? Their education perpetuates a system of white supremacy. Their education says that Christopher Columbus in 1492 found the New World, despite the fact that human beings had been on this land for tens of thousands of years before.
Indigenous humans.
Indigenous humans, right? Native people were here when Christopher Columbus arrived, and yet he's revered, and they are called savages in quotes, right? They are called quote unquote different, but he was different.
Yeah.
And his disease and the diseases that he and people like him brought to these shores was savage in the desolation that was caused. And in addition to disease, it was war and murderous genocide of over 20 million human beings by white colonialists. That's the history that we are experiencing, that we are living in now, the ramifications, the wake, the ripple effects of that. And we don't learn about it. And we don't talk about it in a meaningful way. And that is because who is in control, who is doing the writing, are preventing that type of learning from happening. And so, how then does a person who is experiencing those lessons be transformed to someone who's more liberated, someone who's a little more conscious, a little more engaged as a voter, engaged as a person and what's going on, and able to critically think and analyze and critique what's happening, in addition to just trying to keep food on the table? Right? Like, how do you do that? It's what role does community have in it? What role do elders have? What role do people who are more privileged have to take, a couple of hours and not watch Netflix, but instead join some of these nonprofits and do the work to elevate voices of people in communities through podcasts, right? What voice of people who are more enlightened have to get proximate to folks who this system has intentionally stripped of the opportunity to be more informed and educated about what is happening? And how have they done it? They have used capitalistic exploitation to steal time. Poverty, I grew up in poverty, is the stealing of time. If you must work 60, 70, 80 hours a week instead of the 40, what does the person with the 40 get to do that you can't? Are they going to the kids' games? Right? Are they on the PTA? Are they on the city council? Are they on the school board? Are they at parent teacher conferences? Right? But if you steal people's time, right? Are they reading? Are they researching? Are they in community associations? Are they a part of Memphis Community Against Pollution? Are they out there protesting or marching or writing letters or sending letters to city councilors? And right, like, what are they doing if they get those 40 plus hours back into their lives that is being stolen because they're being crushed by this economic system the way it's currently constructed? Right. So what role does community have to then say in just a sentence, in just a tweet, in just a moment, and meeting people where they are at the grocery store or at the daycare center or at the laundromat to say, hey, this is happening and I want to make sure you know and are informed as best as we can in the 30 seconds that I get of mine with yours. But that takes a accountability and a responsibility of people who have the means, the time, and the privilege to do a little more than we've been doing.
Do you think that it's difficult to get these things done where progressing, who's able to voice their opinion, or is it something that we kind of come to like a maybe a peak or a standstill, and there's no movement? We just have the same people doing the same thing with the same power and same story being told.
Mm-hmm. I am an eternal optimist. On my worst day, I'm going to believe that change is coming and that better days are ahead. And that's deeply rooted in faith and deeply rooted in the recognition of this moment. We're both presenting, at least as Black African American folks in this country. My ancestors were enslaved in South Carolina and Mississippi for over a century and a half. They woke up every day believing that this was it, right? Having known, rather, not believing, knowing that the ancestors before them were enslaved, but weren't always, but could probably only believe in the moments or know in the moments that the child that they were now having or carrying would be enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And so all your past and all your future looks bleak, right? But something broke through. God, faith, something broke through for them, even in the most difficult, desolate moments that I could possibly imagine happening to other human beings, where they're being beaten and tormented and terrorized and raped and killed, and all these things happen. And somehow, in that hell on earth in this country, they didn't succumb to it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's impossible to believe that we have reached a point where we will, or people will succumb to this status quo. There always are the people who dissent, and I always want there to be more. And as Moses, our Moses, Harriet Tubman said, she said, I freed thousands of people, and I would have freed thousands of more had they known they were enslaved.
Mm.
Right? Some people, white in particular and black, may not be freed, but there are always those who dissent actively, and they push us forward to be able to live and to push our future forward, so that our future people live in a different world than the one that we currently inhabit.
Yeah, and there's so many ways that if the people aren't getting the information that they need, then they're not going to even try. They're not going to even attempt to do the things that they need to do to get that kind of stuff done. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we see with the pipeline issue
Mm-hmm.
is those companies are smart enough to be like, oh, these, yeah, as you said, path of least resistance. Oh, these people don't even know what's going on. So how are they going
Mm-hmm.
to fight back? So
Mm-hmm.
when you are able to target those
Mm-hmm.
neighborhoods or those communities and just be like, yeah, we could probably do this here because we know for a fact that they're going to have a hard time giving us flack for everything that we're doing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just going to be able to do it. And at that point, if the people in the community are unable to um, have resistance against these types of companies, then that's when the government on a bigger scale should be stepping in, but they aren't. And it's kind of weird that it's like that because when you're getting arrested, they
Mm-hmm.
say you have the opportunity to have an attorney and they're going to give you one.
Mm-hmm.
Why can't communities have that same option?
Yes. Yep. Oh, that's good. Yeah. Vulnerable communities are left vulnerable, and this goes to the expendability paradox or expendability paradigm that we live in. Richer communities, corporations know, will be able to go and get attorneys.
Yeah.
So even if they were trying to sell their land, they'll get a fair price for it because they've got a lawyer. Poorer communities, they know. They know because they know American history just like we do. But these folks will not be able to have a fight in the same way. But the spirit of the people is strong. And what we have a responsibility to do by being more proximate, by paying attention to what's going on and not listening to the philanthropy that they're spending in communities and not listening to those sorts of things, by really paying attention, we can go into the communities that they think are disempowered. And we can say, how can we help? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that's ultimately where we want to get to. It's how can we help? Because we were listening, because I was at your cookout, because I was at your barbecue. I showed up. And maybe you don't live there, but are you from there? I'm from South Memphis, right? This is my people. And so it is, how can you get proximate to these places that are disempowered? Jackson, if the pipeline company wanted to come back, they would go back to the same neighborhood.
Mm.
They wouldn't go to Collierville or Germantown. They wouldn't. They would go back to the exact same Black communities that they have believed for a long time to be powerless. but it's our responsibility to empower those very communities. And no, I studied government and legal studies in college, but we can't expect government to do it for us.
Hmm.
We have to first build our community people power, and then we push government to do the things that government should do in protecting us. And when they're not doing that, we have a right to dissent, right? We have a right to demand better, which is what we're doing at the State House this upcoming Tuesday. Um, and we'll be doing for the next couple of weeks to demand that they do better and protect people and not pipelines.
Yeah, and if you just basically look at the situations that people are in, and you try to, get people to do more proactive, as you were saying, like I was at that cookout, I was at this venue when you had an event going on and you were trying to uplift the community. There should be people already in place that are doing more proactive stuff than reactive, because when you're reactive, it might be too late.
Yeah.
Whatever you're trying to fight against, it might be too late. And when you aren't jumping on top of these things prior to them going on, then that's what allows people to believe that they can even try.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you think about like old times when people were fighting in like knights and castles and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that, if they knew that they weren't going to have any kind of resistance until they got to the freaking wall
Right.
castle, then they'd be like, oh yeah, we're good. But if they
Yeah.
knew that they were going to get like, oh, we got to go up this mountain first, and then we got to
Mm-hmm.
cross this valley,
Mm-hmm.
it's not even worth our time.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of situation that you want for communities. Is you want them to have a hard time to even get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they get to that point, they're so sick of going through hoops and loops that they're just like, all right, never mind. But
Mm-hmm.
right now, they're marching straight to the castle and trying to knock it down.
Right. Right. I mean, we want communities to be protected. There are some communities that have invisible protection of white privilege, of wealth. And there are other communities that are just left vulnerable. And we get told when you try and protect those communities with law or with policy that somehow that is wrong. And you can see that argument extrapolated with the pipeline legislation right now going on in Tennessee, all the way to conversations about affirmative action. It is certain folks get to walk around with privileges that were unearned, but that they don't have to write next to anything. They don't need a law, right, to protect them from not being disproportionately killed by police. It just doesn't happen. They'll need a law to help them get into school. Their parents went to the school, and so they get legacy admissions. Um, and because that is true, right, when we do something subversive to say everybody gets equal protection under the law, folks rail against that, right? It's like there's already equal protection under the law. No, there's unequal protection. Just like today, there's unequal protection when it comes to fossil fuel infrastructure. Rich, wealthy white folks never will have to think about it. Low wealth black folks, low wealth white folks, low wealth indigenous communities, yeah, it's on their mind because they're most vulnerable. And what a good society and a good government would do is choose where we are most vulnerable and work from there, not where we are most powerful and work from there. And it is going to be that necessary paradigm shift that will actually improve our society and improve our life circumstances. And it's going to take a lot to get there. I'm not gonna lie to you. It's going to take a lot to get there.
I mean, if you just go by the phrase, you're only as strong as your weakest link, then
Mm-hmm.
if you don't, why wouldn't you want to support these communities? Why wouldn't you want to uplift them? Because it's like if Tennessee is the parent, the Congress people or whoever, if those are the parents, and then the citizens of the state are the children, why wouldn't you want to take care of them so that they can be independent and do what they need to do, rather than having to, take care of them and give them the support they need consistently. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's basically what welfare and all these programs are, is the government having to take care of people more because they didn't take care of people in the first place.
That's right.
So
That's
it's
right.
it's it's pretty crazy that they don't just want to support the weak link of
Mhm.
not having good school systems, not having good food in these communities. If you just put it there, then the people could sustain and help themselves.
Right. But this is these are the myths that I'm learning about things. Folks don't really want to see everyone succeed.
Mm,
Folks really don't want to give everyone an opportunity because, particularly white people, I'm talking about top 1% of people here in positions of power who are really in control of government and a lot of other things, lots of corporations, um, are invested in the status quo, really invested financially, invested in keeping things the same. They're even, and we can talk a little bit about education, but there's a desire to say, let's have charter schools, right? I have good friends who attended charter schools, um, but the fix to education is argued the fix is just charter schools. Just have more charter schools, give people school choice. But if we changed every school today from public to charter, what does that do? Right? If every school today just became charter, go rename it all as they do and share the buildings or whatever the case is, it's like you didn't deal with the communities that the charter schools are inside of.
mm,
Still haven't dealt with the fact that people are coming to school hungry or are coming to school having dealt with a difficult night for because there was violence at home or violence around them. You haven't dealt with their inability to get medication potentially as a child with ADHD or ADD, right? You haven't dealt with any of the societal stressors that are influencing what's happening within the inside of the school. But yet, the same folks who would advocate for charters will not advocate to expand child tax credits so
mm.
parents have more money to take care of the kids. Same people who would advocate for school choice or vouchers and all these things. They just go to a different place as if that's going to improve the thing, are the same ones who don't want us to improve the housing conditions of kids who are drinking lead water. Like, there's no real desire for people and politicians in particular, that we are coming up against, particularly when I'm seeing this legislation, more conservative people. But I've seen this in people who call themselves Democrats too. There's been no real desire to change the status quo, right? And so, who is suffering? It is children, but children don't remain children. They become teenagers and they become young adults, and they're further and further behind a standard that was inequitably set against a kid who had everything that they needed. And then if they go to gangs for community, or if they are working for $7.25 an hour, we're told that there's something wrong with them.
Mm.
There's something wrong with you, not something wrong with our country, not something wrong with our laws, not something wrong with our economic structure, not something wrong with our corporate oligarchs, right? Like, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with the military getting half of every dollar in taxes. Nothing wrong with that stuff, right? But there's something wrong with you as an individual. But there's nothing wrong with the individuals making billions. They're good. Right? Like the idea that there are people in power who are principled, I don't think that is as true as much as I once thought it was. And because people lack principles, they will do what is expedient. And what is expedient is usually what's to the benefit of wealthy corporations and donors. And so it takes a movement of people, it takes a people-powered movement to help to subvert all of that energy and effort being spent against us by people who are supposed to represent us.
Yeah, like as you were saying, their motivation is zero to none to make sure the black communities are, taken care of correctly. Because as I was bringing up earlier, they don't live in those areas. So,
Right.
like, why do I need to make sure that they have everything that they need?
Right.
Zero motivation, and then also just them being able to to see that kind of optimistic view of what happens if we did take care of, the kids in this neighborhood. And I like the points you were making about, a kid being in a great school system compared to a bad one, and calling the kids that do wrong or that are in the bad system and can't do well, that there's something wrong with them. Well, it's like the kids that are in a great school system, majority, white kids that have like a nice private school or something like that, they should have zero excuse to not perform. I mean,
Right.
you literally have everything that you need.
Right.
What's wrong with you? Like, why why can't you do well in this prosperous oasis of
Right.
knowledge and skills? So it's crazy that we don't even, it's an experiment. Like that's really what all this is a really bad experiment where the variables aren't changing in the favor of the things that should be changed.
That's right.
They're staying constant, and they want the experiment to come out the way that they want it. It's like we have those bad scientists or people who are doing experiments, and they like to change the skew the results in their favor, and that's basically what's going on right now.
That is the American experiment.
Yeah.
It is one of overwhelmingly predetermined outcomes, and a couple of folks who are outliers, but it wasn't supposed to happen, right? And we can tell that because we can look at how many white people are in power in the Fortune 500. How many of them are on the New York Times list? How many of them lead the country, right? How many of them lead governors, are in governors' mansions, senators? How many have power? And we can see that the system has skewed heavily, that if you are a white male, particularly Christian in this country, you really don't have any excuses. Yet, that is the group that says they're most oppressed. That's the group that is articulating arguments about everyone's taking away their rights, doing things to them. Instead of saying, I realize I've had the wind at my back this whole time.
Yeah.
Now that I've turned around, I realize that there's some more that I need to do. But it's a faux narrative that by doing justice, people lose. Heather McGhee in her book, The Sum of Us, talks about the myth of the zero-sum game. It's a myth.
Yeah.
If we all do better, we all do better. And to upset this system, it's going to take some of those white middle-class men and white women in particular to say, I recognize my privilege, and I recognize where I've been wrong and complacent in this system. And I want to actively disrupt it. I want to actively seek anti-racist policies. I want to actively do things differently because this isn't right. It's not right. And I tell folks, we are going to win in the end. I don't know if I'll even be here to see it, but we're going to win in the end because we are right. If we were wrong, I would lose faith and hope every other day. But we're right to advocate for social justice. We're right to advocate for racial justice. We're right to advocate for economic justice. We're right to advocate for environmental justice. We are right to advocate and to expect these things to happen in a place that has plenty. We are right. We just have to find the fights and fight.
There's, I think, a weird type of a feeling for certain like success stories. We look at people who were in less favorable neighborhoods and coming from like a bad background, and it's like people like, oh man, what a great story. They did this, did that, and it's like, yeah, it might be a great story, but we shouldn't value the story of having a bad neighborhood and then becoming a success. We should be like, oh, why they have a bad neighborhood? All right,
Hmm.
let's fix that neighborhood so they don't have
Hmm.
to struggle. We don't have to wait another 20, 50 years to have a person come out of the slums and then do well.
Hmm. Hmm.
You could multiply the amount of people who do well
Hmm.
by 10x or 100x because you fix the community that they were in. You know, we
Hmm.
see people like Kendrick Lamar and Venus and Serena Williams coming out of a bad place of
Hmm.
Compton. And it's like, oh, maybe we should probably clean up Compton's area
Hmm.
and we could have 100 Venus and Serena Williams
Right.
and Kendrick Lamar's. So
Yeah.
that that always baffled me is how it's almost like we cherish the great story because that's, as you were saying, the status quo. Like that's what's been normal, so let's keep it that way.
Right. And I mean, exceptionalism of Black people in particular is a tool of white supremacy.
Hmm.
Because if you have an example of a Black person who's made it out, then what needs to change? They did it.
Yeah, yeah,
Why can't you do it?
yeah.
Instead of taking a serious look at the word, it's exceptionalism, an exception to the rule. The rule was that those two young ladies would never play tennis of all sports, right? The rule was that Kendrick Lamar and a lot of his high school classmates be dead or in jail. The rule, right, was not for folks like me to be going to school boards advocating for textbooks, but instead tolerating the inequity in education and being satisfied, right? The rule is we will beat them down so much that they will not know how to fight. And when they're ready to fight, they won't have the tools to do it.
Hmm.
So we win either way. That is the rule. And it works.
Hmm.
It has worked, right? Systematically, it has worked.
Yeah.
And there are some folks who break through with the help of their God and the help of people in their community and the help of a lot of other people to break through and to fight that. And those people from Denmark Vesey to Fannie Lou Hamer, though they changed the course of history. And so the starting point for the next person who wants to advocate for justice and change the system is at a different place. But I would have I don't put my hope in institutions. I put my hope in people, right? And we have to put our hope in people who want to live a better existence. But no one is safe in America. So that's my home. That's the only one I know. No one is safe in America, in an America where 140 million people are poor and low wealth. And you have folk going up and flying in space. There's no way you can sleep well
Yeah.
every night.
Yeah.
And in this city, 52% of children go to sleep impoverished, and a third of Black people are living below the poverty line. That's really hard to be at ease in
Yeah.
that type of world. And a lot of people are totally at ease there. In fact, they're not even here. They're at their second home in Europe, right? And we have to admit that some people who think they're rich or wealthy and see themselves so different from poor people or lower wealth people, they have no idea how the folks who are the real oligarchs of this country, how they're living. And more of us are supposed to be in the boat together than not. But if you don't want to be in the boat, there is an ocean for people to swim in because
Mm.
we've got to go somewhere.
Yeah. Going back to the athlete type thing, I I don't think that the NCAA is board like people have said is basically slavery. Like, yeah, they have the opportunity to get degrees like master degrees, and it's all paid for as long as they play for the the college or university of their choice. But at the same time, you know, we all know, elephant in the room, that black athletes are just dominate, a good bit of sports.
Hmm.
But it's crazy that we see these kids that come out of these bad neighborhoods being exceptional athletes, as you were talking about, and people probably have the mindset of, oh, if that kid made it out, then why can't the rest of everybody else? But going back to the point I was trying to make, why wouldn't we see, this one kid that came out of Apopka, Florida, where, it might be a horrible gang area. Why wouldn't you want to invest in that area? I'm like, oh, if they had one kid like that,
Hmm.
what if they had a great school system? We could have 50 kids like that.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I don't see how they don't view that as an issue.
Hmm. Because the status quo is working for 'em. I mean, folks don't really change until they've decided internally that the way that I am operating, like it no longer serves me. And it is quite selfless to say that the way that I am operating, though everything seems to be good, because it's not for somebody else, does not serve me. That's another level of thinking,
Hmm.
to really realize that because that child is being undereducated, because this person is being underpaid, because that person, someone was dying because they didn't have health care. It is worse for all of us. It's worse for me compared to I have a stable job, a stable career, a stable salary. I have a home. I have a car. I have a family. So I'm okay. That's where most people live.
Hmm.
I've worked hard to get to those things. It is another level. It is subversive to the status quo that tells you that everything is okay. To say everything for me might be okay, but because it is not for somebody else, I got to do something.
Yeah.
That is not common, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And if we do not get more people to that point, we're going to continue to live and replicate cycles of harm that are going to cripple our democracy.
Is there a certain project that you're working on right now in communities to help them out?
Yeah. So right now we are doing a few things with Memphis Community Against Pollution. We are fighting the Tennessee Valley Authority's toxic coal ash plans. So we're doing canvassing, informing the community and educating the community about that. At the same time, we're building MCAP strategic plan. And so we're going into communities to go and build some MCAP educators. And so teach people about what's happening, particularly with toxic air, but also water and soil. And we'll be continuing to kind of launch that. And then I'm also the co-lead and strategic advisor to the Poor People's Campaign National Call for Moral Revival. And recently we learned of an incident in Mason, Tennessee, where the government is taking over its finances and also playing a role, kind of an overseer of this majority Black town as a great significant investment from Ford is coming in. And so I'm working on that as well.
Do you feel like the things that you're working on, are you getting the support you need, or is it, I mean, you can always welcome more support, but is there any type of like extreme deficit, or it just seem like, oh, we're about average, it's okay? How's your support?
Yeah, that's a good question. For Memphis Community Against Pollution, I feel we're getting a good amount of support, and our coalition is growing, which feels really good. Financially, we need more support as we seek to hire an executive director and an assistant, administrative assistant, to help move some of this work in Memphis forward around research and education and advocacy and change, driving toward change. Um, and as it comes to the new work with the Poor People's Campaign, that is really kicking off in the past couple of weeks. I believe there's a strong committee of people. And to your point, we want more support because when we talk about systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the denial of healthcare, militarism and the war economy and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism, that encompasses a lot of people and a lot of things. And so I see how my work and my life's work interact with one another, but there's room enough for everybody to be in the fight. And we need more people off the bench. It's easy to make comments and it's easy to do those things, but if you can make a comment on Facebook, you can send an email to a city councilor, right? If you can like a button on some famous person's Twitter, you can go and like a tweet from Memphis CAP underscore org, right? Like you can do these things to help elevate and amplify the different causes that are happening. And we just need folks with a willingness to be a part, because as Dr. King once said, everybody can serve,
Hmm.
right? Everybody. You don't have to have degrees, no D's behind your name, but everybody can serve. And that's what is so powerful about this movement that's building and growing in Memphis, and that I'm fortunate to play a small part in.
Do you think that there's anything in particular that would be like a groundbreaking change to help, I guess, communities and even organizations like yours to help people?
It's something groundbreaking. I have a vision of a network,
Hmm.
right? Like a groundbreaking thing would be having the resources and a well-financed, staffed network for people in pursuit of social justice to connect our communities. And it's starting to happen in some small ways, but you need an institution to help drive these things. And that's just the truth of it. And a lot of people don't want to become institutionalist as it relates to organizations and hierarchies and things of this sort. But to really build power, you want to have and share messaging and resources in a way that helps you to affect more change.
Yeah, I mean, even going back to, like what we were talking about earlier, is if a community feels like they're in shambles of the government taking over, then they should be able to, call or send an email to like these group of lawyers or something that deal with situations like this all the time. And they should just be like a phone call away or an email
Right.
away from having like a SWAT team of lawyers, come in and help out communities and number one, educate them and help them know what's going on. Because it's one thing to just come in and just, all right, we fixed it, you're good to go,
Mhm,
and then
mhm.
they're like, what'd you do? Like, what happened?
Right. Yeah. Where was the partnership?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's exactly right. Where was the partnership? And even with our attorneys, we have about half a dozen attorneys. It is always how do we do this advocacy together? It's different types of advocacy, but we want to do it together for sure.
well, it's been great, Justin. If you could give everybody any kind of information that you want to make sure that they stay involved and or to just know about what you're doing, links, whatever you got.
Yeah, thank you so much again for the opportunity, Jackson. This has been great to spend the time together. We traversed a lot of ground, and I do believe I'm an eternal optimist, and I believe that the more of us who seek to be relatively conscious and do the work of justice, the future is still extraordinarily bright for ourselves and for 7 generations from now. Please go to memphiscap.org/join to stay connected. We'll keep you on our mailing list, and we'll keep informing you about city council meetings, about actions that you can take to connect with our state leaders as well. And you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at MemphisCAP_org. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, just Justin J. Pearson at Justin J. Pearson for Twitter and Instagram as well. And I'd be happy to stay in touch. And I'll even go so far, you can reach me at 901-754-9699 if you'd like to learn more ways to get involved and engage. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for just sharing all information, wisdom, knowledge that you have because it's almost embarrassing the amount of information that's out there that people don't know. Like communities should feel bad for not having more access to information, and it's something that we all have to work on. But as you said, optimistically, we'll get there. It just takes time. It takes a couple people hitting that retweet on your organization's a Twitter or an Instagram. Like when people have these types of things, as you said, if you can hit a like on that, you can send an email, you can send something. So if as long as we all have that same vision, and stay focused, then it'll get there for sure.
For sure. For sure. I truly am hopeful and optimistic, and we just got to keep pushing. That's what we're going to do, Jackson. We're going to keep pushing, and we're going to keep making change happen.
Awesome, and I believe it for sure. Alrighty, well, thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.